Hare Krishna. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jashodanandana Braja-ras Jashodanandana Braja-ras Jashodanandana Braja-ras Yamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare So today we'll be reading from Shrimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 3, Text 1. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. So this is in the conversation between Suta Goswami and the sages assembled at Naimisharanya. And he starts answering the questions that the sages posed to him. And here he talks about the various incarnations of the Lord in this chapter. In particular, he talks about the initial process of creation. So you can repeat after me. Suto vacha Jagrihe Paurusham Rupam Bhagavan Mahadadibi Sambhutam Shodashakalam Ado Loka Shikshaya. Would one of you like to chant? Suto vacha Jagrihe Paurusham Rupam
Mahadadibhi
Bhagavan Mahadadibhi
Sambhutam Sodasha Kalam
Sambhutam Shodasha Kalam
Adholoka Shishikshaya
Adoloka Sushikshaya
Jagrihe Purusham Rupam
Jagrihe Purusham Rupam
Maharadibihi
Bhagavan Mahadadibhi
Sambhutam Surashakalam
Sambhutam Shodasha Kalam
Adoloka Sisrikshaya
Adoloka Shishikshaya. On this side.
Sutta uvacha
Sutta uvacha
Jagrihe Purusham Rupam
Jagrihe Purusham Rupam
Bhagavan Mahadadiha
Bhagavan Mahadadibhi
Sambhutam Shodashakalam
Sambhutam Shodasha Kalam
Adoloka Sisikshaya
Adoloka Srishikshaya. Synonyms. Sutta uvacha, Sutta said. Jagrihe, accepted. Paurusham, plenary portion as the Purusha incarnation. Rupam, form. Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. Mahad Adivi, with ingredients of the material world. Sambhutam, thus there was the creation of. Shodasha Kalam, 16 primary principles. Ado, in the beginning. Loka, the universes. Sisrikshaya, on the intention of creating. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Sutta said, in the beginning of the creation, the Lord first expanded himself in the universal form of the Purusha incarnation and manifested all the ingredients for the material creation. And thus, at first there was the creation of the 16 principles of material action. This was for the purpose of creating the material universes. Purport. The Bhagavad Gita states that the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, maintains these material universes by extending his plenary expansions. So this Purusha form is the confirmation of the same principle. The original personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, or Krishna, or Lord Krishna, who is famous as the son of King Vasudeva, or King Nanda, is full with all opulences, all potencies, all fame, all beauty, all knowledge, and all renunciation. A part of his opulence is manifested as impersonal Brahman, and a part of his opulence is manifested as Paramatma. This Purusha feature of the same personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, is the original Paramatma manifestation of the Lord. There are 3 Purusha features in the material creation. And this form, who is known as the Karanadakashaya Vishnu, is the first of the 3. The others are known as Garbhodakashaya Vishnu and the Shirodakashaya Vishnu. And in each one of the universes, the Lord enters as Garbhodakashaya Vishnu. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is also mentioned that the material world is created at certain intervals and then again destroyed. This creation and destruction is done by the supreme will because of the conditioned souls, or the Nitya Baddha living beings. The Nitya Baddha, or the eternally conditioned souls, have the sense of individuality, or ahankar, which dictates to them sense enjoyment, which they are unable to have constitutionally. The Lord is the only enjoyer, and all the others are enjoyed. The living beings are predominated enjoyers, but the eternally conditioned souls, forgetful of this constitutional position, have strong aspirations to enjoy. The chance to enjoy matter is given to the conditioned souls in the material world, and side by side they are given the chance to understand their real constitutional position. Those fortunate living entities who catch the truth and surrender unto the lotus feet of Vasudeva after many, many births in the material world, join the eternally liberated souls, and thus are allowed to enter into the kingdom of Godhead. After this, such fortunate living entities need not come again. Within the occasional within the occasional material creation. But those who cannot catch the constitutional truth are again merged into the Mahat Tattva at the time of the annihilation of the material creation. When the creation is again set up, the Mahat Tattva is again let loose. This Mahat Tattva contains all the ingredients of the material manifestations, including the conditioned souls. Primarily, this Mahat Tattva is divided into 16 parts, namely the 5 gross material elements and the 11 working instruments or senses. It is like the cloud in the clear sky. In the spiritual sky, the effulgence of Brahman is spread all around the world, and the whole system is dazzling in spiritual light. The Mahat Tattva is assembled in some corner of the vast unlimited spiritual sky, and the part which is thus covered by the Mahat Tattva is called the material sky. This part of the spiritual sky, called the Mahat Tattva, is only an insignificant portion of the whole spiritual sky. And within this Mahat Tattva, there are innumerable universes. All these universes are collectively produced by the Karanadakashayi Vishnu, called also the Mahavishnu, who simply throws his glance to impregnate the material sky. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Nadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Now, could you go to the slides, Mataji, please? Or my screen, rather. Today we'll be speaking on the topic of evolution. So last time when I was here, I spoke about whether life can come from chemicals, and we talked about how life could form potentially from just a mixture of atoms, and we discussed the absurdity of that kind of claim or hypothesis of how the world came about. And so today we're going to be speaking a little bit more on the topic of evolution. So let me try to... Let's see. I'm not able to go full screen on that. There we go. Okay. So today, the roadmap is we'll go over the theory of evolution, the complexity of life. We'll talk about what are the steps, the limits of nature, speculation against speculation, and then inverse evolution. And so we're a small group over here, so if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand in between, and we can talk them through. The reason why we consider these topics is because Srila Prabhupada has asked us to do so in this world. This is a quote from him. So we have to challenge, protest, defeat. This will be our work. Our worshipping of Krishna, that is our internal affair. The external affair will be to establish this theory. Otherwise, they will be misleading society. So this is very important to us, especially now when it comes to preaching. A lot of these questions are immediately asked, or immediately at least thought of, where someone might ask, what do you say about evolution? What do you say about the origin of species, origin of life, and so on? And so it's very helpful for us to know how we can respond to those kinds of queries. All the work that I'm presenting today has come from Sadaputta Prabhu, also known as Richard L. Thompson. And so he was a great researcher. He was instructed by Prabhupada and many other devotees to look into these topics and to come up with arguments against different theories that are out there in the world by scientists. At the end of the day, you can't really prove anything outside of mathematical terms. And so you're basically having arguments to convince one another. And so that's how these arguments come about. And he's presented many in terms of evolution that we will be covering today. And so to recap, if you are not fully aware of the theory of evolution, we have a very natural understanding of it from school. And even in books that have nothing to do with life or evolution, they will immediately accept this as an embedded theory, where one might say, we have this tendency as humans because we evolved from hunter-gatherer species or from monkeys, or some sort of intuition that people have internally. And so we've all kind of grown up in this education system. And so evolution, this theory, is very much prominent in in our daily lives, in our daily conversations, especially with those from the scientific world. And so the first question is, can life come from chemicals? And so we discussed this last time because it is quite implausible, actually, when you really dig down into it. And Charles Darwin, he was a prominent naturalist in the 19th century, and he propagated the theory of evolution. And from a young age, he was actually known to be very keen at observing animals, observing nature. He was good at observing behaviors in humans. And so he also struggled to learn from books. So he was a part of a very astute college, and then he's actually transferred to a religious college because of his type of study. It wasn't so book driven. And so he went on this famous voyage around South America, the Americas in general. And he was studying various fossil discoveries. He was studying indigenous cultures over there. He was studying various species of finches and birds, rock formations, all that. And he had this interest in the primitive world. He had an interest in what the world was like, back in ancient times and so on. And so he ideated this form of natural selection, and this potential theory of evolution that comes from that. And he was always very conservative, actually, in sharing his thoughts. He was afraid of it being offensive to the church. The church was a big deal back then, especially in Europe. And they had the history of stifling this kind of thought. And so it was really through other scientists, such as Thomas Huxley, through John Maynard Smith, that his theory was advertised and propagated throughout the world. So if it weren't for them, no one would really know about Darwin's theory of evolution. The theory of evolution has two main, axioms. One is mutations. So a mutation is when the DNA encoding changes a little bit, it produces a variation, and so you have some new kind of organism or creature that comes out. And then by natural selection, there is the survival of the fittest. And so if there are mutations that are improving that kind of species, a new species may form, the old primitive one will die out. So this is an example that is sometimes said for rats. There were white and brown rats. All the white ones were easily visible in the sand. And so they would get eaten up. The brown ones survived more. And so then they, so-and-so evolved into having the brown color. And so in this cycle, we've evolved into these species that we have right now. As humans, we've also evolved over billions of years of the same process of mutations and natural selection. So that's what the theory of evolution says. However, there's a lot to consider with this. Number one is the complexity of life. So this is a very important argument when we talk about evolution. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, yantra rudhani mayaya, where the body is considered like a machine. And so there's some conception of a machine back then. And in fact, even in ancient Indian texts, there are descriptions of like hydraulic machines, like you can, like a pressure plate in front of your door. You can step on that plate and then someone will a robot will greet you or open the door automatically. So there are descriptions of this. From the King Bhojadev was one of them, where they had these robots or machines that they had created for enjoyment, for show, and so on. And so there was this concept of a machine back then. So when it says yantra, that actually means a machine, very similar to what we can understand right now. And so, of course, the body is the machine, but there's also the spirit in the body in form of the soul, which is the self, and then the super soul, which is the guiding intelligence. And then this body also consists of the physical, gross elements that we can see. And then there's also the subtle elements, such as the mind. And in modern science, only the gross body is really considered as the description of life, as a description of a human life. And the body is extremely, extremely complex. For example, we can go deep into one protein structure. So our body is built of many different protein structures. There's a lot going on inside. Every cell in our body has its own protein structures, its own, you could say, microscopic elements to it. And so this architecture is extremely complex. This is one of them. It's simplified, actually. So it's even more complex than this. And the one that was simplified in this picture was also a simple protein. And so this is just one of them. And then a single bacteria can have so many of these structures within it. And no one can really make a model of how the human body works in this fine detail at the entire scale of the body because it's so exceedingly complex. One of the most complex features of our body, or body parts, is the eye. Has anyone really studied the eye in school here? But we use it every day, right? And so the eye has a lot of moving parts. In fact, in the cornea of the eye, there's a membrane, a very thin membrane. And someone wrote a 300-page dissertation on just that one thin membrane. And so the eye is extremely, extremely complex. And there's many chemicals that are found here that are not found anywhere else in the body. The lens of the eye is also very special. It allows light to enter, that's number one. It can focus on objects and also change its own shape. And it's very precise because it can do both at the same time. And if you are to do this with a blob of jelly, it's not as intuitive, it's not obvious how it does it. There are muscles along the rim of that lens that contract and loosen the lens. And there's also nerve connections to those muscles where you can control it from your brain. And then all these mechanics are extremely complex. The iris of the eye can also open and shut to allow different amounts of light. The retina, which is the most complex part probably, it has cells to detect different wavelengths of light, where it can be sensitive to different types of colors, and then that allows electrical signals to go to your brain. And that's also extremely complex, our ability to actually see something. And so this, like any normal eye, a human eye makes the modern camera look extremely primitive. And Darwin himself actually had a great quote for the eye. He said, "To suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, etc., could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree." So he himself acknowledged that this was quite absurd for natural selection. He goes on to say that it actually did happen by evolution, but he did make this point initially. So one is supposed to imagine that by accidental changes, this whole thing comes about. And that's quite absurd to think about when we really go into the details of what that complexity actually is. Another complex part of our body is, or not our body, but the horse's body is their hoof. And so scientists say it's very similar to like an elongated toenail of ours. And so that's the comparison that's made, but it's extremely complex. Number one, it has to sustain high amounts of stress. When a horse is running or galloping, it's putting its entire body weight along with some height and jump on one hoof. So it has to sustain that level of, it's tons of force that are going into that one hoof. The fibers in the hoof, they actually go crisscross to have extra strength in that hoof. And then there are actually sacs of liquid inside their hoof, which have some liquid, and then these are like cushions. They're like hydraulic cushions, like the ones we have in our car, that allow it to cushion its steps and its when it's galloping and so on. And then there are tendons around their bones that allow it to be springy, and so they allow it to run faster and so on. So how can such a complex hoof form? It's quite remarkable. It's so precise, and it's able to endure a high amount of stress. So the question, the main principle that Sadhaputta Prabhu always brings up is, what are the steps? There's a famous story with him and a Nobel Prize winning scientist, and he was going on about evolution, and then Sadhaputta Prabhu was like, okay, so what are the steps from this to that? And he's like, oh, you're not a real scientist if you think about all that. It's all about, it's the fact that it's possible. Anything is possible. And so it doesn't matter what the steps are. This is not scientific reasoning. And so this is a very common kind of question that stifles any kind of thought in this area, where if you ask what are the steps, it helps you understand, or it helps them really see the holes in their own logic. And so we're going to go through this thought process here. A big part of evolutionary theory relies on us thinking of organisms, creatures as like clouds, like amorphous clouds. You see a shape of a dog in a cloud, and then you see a shape of a cat in the cloud. And then you can easily kind of imagine, okay, maybe you can kind of mold it and you can get to the cat, from a dog to a cat, or a monkey to a human, in this cloud form, very vague, very like clay-like, moldable form. And so it's not so difficult to intuitively think we can go from one to another. But if you try to specify that in an exact way, then you find it very, very difficult to evolve from one thing to another. And so we can think of this in other terms. We can go down, instead of thinking of organism to organism, we can think of machine to machine. And so when we talk about evolution, we ask, what are the steps? And what's important is that scientists also say at every step, it's a working and viable, functional, beneficial living entity. So an intermediary step from one kind of primitive organism to the next organism, all of those steps are viable, they're functional, they're not like breaking apart, and they're also successful. So they're doing well. They're not all the way there, but they're doing quite well. And so if we think of the body as a machine, again, and this is what scientists, this is their model of the body, it is a machine to them. If we think of it in simple terms, how can we go from like a sewing machine like this, which is up here, to like a car engine, step by step, where everything is viable? Everything is a functioning machine. Does that sound possible? Could you do it, do you think? Do you think you could do it? Do you think you can make every single step viable? Even in software, a lot of us who work in software, imagine going from one code base to another code base, and at every step of your code base, it has to be functional. And it's quite difficult to imagine something like that where you're adding so many new things. And so last time we discussed the E. coli propeller, and so another thing is that, you can maybe have some steps that are not beneficial, but if they're not beneficial, if they're expending energy for something useless, like a half-created motor or something like that, then it's going to die out. Because even if it's like, even slightly, but even 1% less productive, because of the way exponential growth works, they will actually die out in a certain amount of time span, even if they have just 1% less productivity than their previous step. And so all these steps have to be extremely beneficial. And we can go even simpler, circuit to circuit. This is a radio circuit up here. And now if you want to go from this circuit to another circuit, how can you do that step by step, where every single step is also a working circuit? We could do it easily we can disassemble it, we can put it back together, that's easy. But can we go one by one, gradually? It's basically impossible to keep all of them functional. And so when we consider like ape to human now, we look at these skulls, scientists look at these skulls, they're like, oh, they're very similar. You can kind of shrink the jaw a little bit, you can extend the cranium, and you get a very similar looking skull to a human from an ape. However, the brain itself that is held within the skull, if we think of it like a circuit, for example, that's a lot of what modern science considers the brain. It's like a circuit, a neural network. And so the circuit of the human, the brain of the human has very special functions compared to an ape. For example, we can talk, right? We have language. We're able to distinguish one word from another. We're able to distinguish these sounds from one to another. We're able to comprehend grammar. And then on top of that, there's a child who doesn't even understand grammar, who's able to speak with very limited training, which is actually very difficult for us adults even, where if we were to try to learn some other language like Japanese, that would be extremely hard to just do it from speech. Like we need to learn the rules of grammar and so on. And so firstly, to build a computer program that can do what a human can do with language is extremely hard. Right now with LLMs, ChatGPT and so on, we can ask them, how many man hours did it take to build that? Probably like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands even, who knows? And at the same time, our brain is able to do that very quickly in like a year or less time as a child. And we can do it without any observable lag. We're able to distinguish like objects in like a flurry of objects. I can tell which book is which from here. I can tell the colors from here on the book stand. I can tell what color you're wearing. I can tell, the size of your like kantimala. I can tell the color of that mic. I can distinguish a mic from a kartal and so on. And without any observable lag, like it's just happening instantaneously like in a flash. And so to do this with a machine, firstly, takes an immense amount of time, effort, and computation. So that's the first premise over here. The second one is to go from one type of brain to another type of brain, ape to human, for example. You have to introduce a whole new set of functions, step by step. And that starts to sound very absurd. It isn't even possible with very simple circuits, like a simple radio circuit. It's got very simple elements to it. We can barely make that into a different type of circuit. What to speak of the brain, from one brain to another. And so it's very important for evolutionists to keep this very vague. Because when it's vague and it's like this clay-like thing, it's very easy to see how you can mold one to another. But when you go into the details of it, when you actually observe the complexity of these different elements of our body, you can notice that it is actually a very troublesome endeavor to go from one to another. One other thing is that many things in a circuit are also interdependent. That's another aspect, where if you were to take out one wire and move it somewhere else, it might have downstream effects. And so this is like bugs in software, where one error can multiply downstream, and then you can have errors later on that came from that you cannot really notice immediately. And so this is another kind of blocker for us from going from one circuit to another. On top of this, in terms of what we have noticed or observed in scientific discovery, there are limits to nature. And so Luther Burbank, he was a famous botanist and horticulturist, and he had this experiment where he was trying to increase the size of plums. And he noticed at a certain point that they couldn't get any bigger. There was a point where that was the natural limit to the size of that plum. And the fruit could not grow any larger. And so this is an example with plants. And this happens pretty often with many fruit and plants. Ernst Mayr, he was an evolutionist, and he was studying fruit flies. So he was trying to mutate fruit flies, and he was trying to increase the number of hairs on their back. So he went extraordinarily from 36 hairs on their back to 56. So this was a big deal and for him. But he noticed once he got to 56, they all either started becoming sterile, so they couldn't reproduce, or they started dying off themselves. And so there was, again, another natural limit to this mutations that he was experimenting with. And again, this is the process of artificial selection. This is what we call breeding. So breeding is where you have a bunch of offspring or new organisms or plants or animals and so on. And then you breed the ones that you like. So if you want them to get bigger, if you want them to have more hairs, you breed the ones with the most hairs together, and you try to multiply that and keep going in that direction. What's interesting in this study is that after he finished it, he let them be. He let them breed normally. And then they actually reverted back to 36. So they didn't stay at 56, the upper limit that he discovered, but they actually came back. So that was another interesting phenomena over here. They're the rabbits of Australia. So Australia had no rabbits. And then some domesticated rabbits from those that moved in escaped. And so these rabbits went into the wild. And domesticated rabbits are breeded for specific colors, especially white, because that's very pleasing, and like certain types of spots and so on. And so they have a very specific type of appearance. But in a few generations, they noticed that the rabbits in the wild started reverting back to their original type of appearance, which is like this brown kind of color, this wild color. And so this is another example of where by artificial breeding and selection, we're able to, exactly that brown color. And so by artificial selection and breeding, they're able to kind of go to the limits of nature. But then when it's left alone to natural selection, as one might say, they come back to the original type of animal or plant and so on. So this is observed in apple trees, this is observed in many different plants. They all revert to their original type. And so so one might ask, okay, do evolutionists have any examples of steps between one entity, one organism to another, one species to another? And they do. They have the example with beetles. So there's someone who studied 400,000 beetles have been studied overall. That's a lot of beetles that someone studied. And they've noticed that the colors on the back of these beetles form a continuum, which means that you can go from one color to another color in one mutation. So it's continuous. So you can go from one species of beetle to another, just the color of one species of beetle to another color of another species of beetle in one mutation. And so there are steps outlined for that because the color has this particular property. However, we can ask, what about the legs of the beetle? What about their eyes? What about their antennas? What about their wings that some have? How about all these other attributes of the beetle? Because these are not addressed. Color is quite simple, but it's not like a mechanical structure. And so when we talk about these machine-like structures in the body, it becomes very difficult for evolutionists to come up with any actual steps, intermediary steps, between one species to another. And so we can think of this as like a rubber band effect. You can stretch it as far as you want, but then at a certain point it reaches its limit, and then either it breaks or it comes back to its original form. And so it's very similar to what we see in nature with breeding and so on. Any questions at this point before we move on? Yes.
My question is, Prabhu, that just like they are speculating because they have some vague understanding, we also have in our text sometimes we don't know the steps. For example, we read the purport today.
Mm-hmm.
It speaks about the creation. Then Lord had a glance on the material nature, and then this came out, then this, then this. But we cannot.
It seems quite fantastical.
Yeah, it is fantastical, and
yeah,
it is similar thing we have in our texts. And we can't understand the steps, and they are also presenting something.
Yeah.
So how are we different from them?
That's a great point. That's actually a great point. There's two things that you can take away from that. Number one is that's what we want them to feel. For example, someone who is asking these questions and trying to understand and wrap their head around it, if we can make both sides feel as irrational to them, then they can open their mind and consider either one. Because then it becomes a question of what they trust, what they believe in, what kind of process of knowledge they agree with. And so that's one aspect of it, where if we can bring them on an equal plane, it's already progress for us, whereas we started off with them considering material science, material education as ground truth, as absolute truth. So when we can take away that absolute truth, make it speculative, it becomes speculation versus speculation. The second point to that is our model of the world, the Vedic model of the world, has both matter and spirit. So there are subtle energies and dynamics also at play. So when it comes to this idea of the Lord glancing on something impregnated with material energy, with consciousness and so on, it's not unreasonable to think so for a Lord that is omnipotent, omniscient, who's eternal, and so on, where he can have that ability to impregnate that nature. And we can go into the details of that. We will go into that in a bit. But that's another way to think about it, where we have a different model altogether, where we actually allow these kinds of subtle things to happen. Yeah. Does that answer the question? Any other questions at this stage?
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is about speculation, right?
I don't know if your mic is on.
Is it now?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So I think in science also, like we always starts with something called hypothesis, and then we say, okay, prove the hypothesis, and then like you are not always like able to prove that what you hypothesized, and then we consider, oh yeah, this is not like how we expected, maybe something else. So I think in science, I mean, I'm from a protein engineering background, that like a cancer science, that's my scientific expertise, and we see that we are not really like, discovering anything. We are just like, we are rediscovering what was already discovered. So, right, in science, like if you see in cell, every day, like every other day, you have a new type of molecule appear, new type of protein, there are trillions and trillions type of protein, you have it. So I think saying that we are like, there was something which we discovered, no, there was already there, we are just trying to rediscover it, right? So that's, I mean, I just wanted to add the point, it's not really a question about the...
That's a great point. No, thank you for adding that.
Yeah, it's this rediscovery we are doing, and maybe we are 0.00001% of that rediscovery of the total human body, not even human body in one cell. Like in one cell, you have different type of, organelles and compartments. In that, you have million type of proteins. In one protein, you have million type of, codons, and in that you go into. So it's so much detail.
Yeah.
I think it's almost impossible to know about it. So yeah, this is I think it's already the scientists, they already accept the limitations, but yeah, that's
That's a great point, because science at the end of the day is all about proving the hypothesis, showing the steps. Yeah. And so when it comes to the origin of species, the origin of life, when evolution is presented, it's presented almost like, oh, you must trust us that we must get to it eventually. But real science is where we actually have a real explanation. An explanation meaning something that explains the truth. And explain, the word, it comes from the root of basically to make it simple. That's the etymology of it, to make the truth simple. And so that explanation that science must give is not there for evolution, because it can be possible. It's very vague. There's no real steps between one species to another. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, no, and also one more point is about, like, for instance, I mostly did, like, my thesis was mostly on brain cancer. So one of the limitation for the brain cancer not to have a cure is because that we don't have a right model to study. So for that, we actually artificially mimic the, for instance, rodent or mice models. We try to make those kind of brains there, and then we induce the cancer to make like similar like human. But there's no way, like every other day you can see in research literature, you discover that we are not able to, because you cannot mimic that, and that is the reason, like, you cannot really have a proper environment to study that particular drug or pathway. So if it's an evolution like this, then at least we can have like a similar brain structure, right? Any of the mammals or like any of the animal, we can have it, but no, we don't have it. It's totally different. Like people, like scientists in scientist community, they started accepting it that, okay, we don't have, and this is the major limitation for the brain cancer to get a cure.
Yeah. And that's what's special about evolution, where like the scientists that actually deal with the complexity of life understand that this is even more absurd. When you deal with that actual complexity, when you go into the fine details of it, it becomes more and more absurd. Whereas when you think of it as clouds or clay models, that vagueness kind of is like a smoke screen. It makes us feel like, oh, this must be very simple. This is so simple. I can just kind of do this with my own Legos or something. And so that's a very important point. And so, as Prabhu was mentioning, it's speculation. And then, in fact, in science itself, there are different speculations of the same thing. So there are things that go against evolutionists. One is vestigial organs. So has anyone got their appendix removed at any point? No? You have? You have, your son, okay. And so they call that a vestigial organ, which is basically it was left over from some evolution in the past. We don't really need it now, and so it's just there because probably some previous version of us needed it, but now we don't need it, and so it's just there. And so the same thing is there with baleen, with baleen whales. This whale has it's like a sieve-like teeth structure to eat. It basically like chomps down a bunch of water, and then it sifts out all the water, and everything that's left behind, the fish, the creatures, whatever, that's what it eats as food. So it has no teeth. It has this like sieve-like body part. And what's interesting is that when it is in embryo stage inside the womb, it actually develops teeth, and then they go back into it. So it generates teeth, and then they get absorbed. And so this is an example scientists use to show that evolution is true, because some ancestor of the whale had teeth. And so that's why you can see it's still there. It's like a vestigial organ. It's still there, but then it goes away. However, there's also another theory for this called regulatory genes, where the theory is that everything in the body is built like on a master body plan. So imagine like a car. You have a car, there's like there's the chassis of the car, and then you've got all these wheels and so on, and you can swap them in and out. And so you have a bunch of switches, like, okay, we're going to switch to this wheel, we're going to switch to that kind of body, we're going to switch to this kind of roof, this kind of paint color, so on. So we have a master plan that we can start with. And so their idea is that DNA also has this kind of encoded master mammal body plan, and then you can turn off switches. So what's happening on the inside of the whale's growth? It's like, let's start tooth program. Okay, never mind, switch it off, and then let's switch to the sieve pattern for this sieve program for this baleen whale, so that for this specific species. And so there's this idea where there's a master plan in the DNA code, and then you just swap them out according to what's needed for that species. And the way the intuition behind it is because sometimes with mutations, like a fly can have a leg that comes out of their head instead of a head being there. And so it's like, oh, there's a code for the head. There's a code for the leg, some program in the DNA, and then we put it in the head area on accident, or the mutation did that. And so now the leg is coming out of the head area. So it's like one can think of it like that. So this is another theory. At the end of the day, they both are completely speculative. It's sheer speculation, and it's just really one speculative idea against another speculative idea. And the regulatory genes one is also very intuitive, where if a human were to build animals, why would you not reuse certain aspects? If you've got to build 20 animals with teeth, why would you start over your teeth project every single time? You'd kind of spin off your previous teeth project into something that changes it for this one, and so on. Another problem, or another kind of question that can be that arises is actually even John Maynard Smith, who was the Pope of Darwinism. He raised the question: what happens if we cut the rate of mutation by half? Do we end up in the same place? Does it take double the time to get to where we are in evolution? What changes? And the thing is, no one knows. No one knows anything, because we have no information of how evolution actually works. And this is very significant when we talk about science, because for even the simplest things, like with voltage, you can change the electrical voltage even 1%, and we immediately know exactly what to expect. We've studied it so well. Everything in science, we know when something is so important, like the rate of mutation, these important parameters in evolution, something so important, if it changes by a drastic amount, like double or half, we have no clue what would happen. And so this, again, just indicates that this is complete guesswork. No one has actually any clue how this works. There's also the giraffe story. You might have heard this in school, where, does anyone know? Why is a giraffe's neck very long? I think you're nodding your head. Do you know? Go ahead.
I don't remember too much, but I guess the animal was trying to reach the food, but then eventually, as like somehow the neck grows in generations.
Yeah, through like natural selection, like the taller ones, were out competing the rest of the giraffes. The taller giraffes were able to eat more leaves. They were able to reach higher things, and so they kept going taller and taller and taller. And so this is one idea, and so this is survival of the fittest, and hence evolution is thus proved. This is an example of it. But we can also ask questions in the opposite direction. There are also issues with having a long neck. You're prone to more neck injuries. You have blood pressure problems. Giraffes actually have a shorter lifespan because when they get older, they're not able to supply blood to the top of their head, their neck, and so on. They have a very special heart to allow that kind of transportation of blood where they don't just burst and bleed. They're also prone to getting struck by lightning because they are the tallest thing in the savannah. It's very awkward for them to run from danger. If someone's attacking them, have you seen a giraffe run, any of you? In like a zoo? It's very awkward. It's like someone running on stilts. And with a long neck that's also like swinging around. They're very vulnerable when they drink water, when they have to like bend down on 4 legs and then bend all the way into the water. And any predator can come and attack them at that time. So they're very vulnerable at that time. And then the second question is, if the giraffe's long neck was so successful, why is that the only thing with the long neck? If they wanted to reach the tops of the canopies, there are so many other types of animals that can also do that. A monkey, for example, can also eat stuff on the top of the canopy, on the top of the tree. So why particularly was a giraffe evolved to have a long neck? And so it's just speculation against another type of speculation. And there's really no way to say which one is correct because we actually have no clue. At the end of the day, it is all subjective. And it just depends on what you feel like saying that day. We can bring up 1,000 other reasons why a long neck can be difficult and more troublesome than a short neck. Yeah, why not long legs? Why not long torso? There's so many things that could have happened differently. And so it's just another indication of how much speculation goes into it. Another argument that's brought up is homology, which is the idea that all these different species, various different entities and organisms, they share a lot of aspects. For example, we all have a very similar hand structure. You can see in this picture the human, arm and hand structure. Then the whale's fin is very similar too. The lizard's legs are also very similar. The wings of a bird are also similar. And so this is another so-called proof that we must have all come from some shared ancestor because we all share similar structures in our body. However, we can also say that this just means that it could also be we were designed by some common designer. Someone designed us using the same kinds of things. If you were to design an animal, for like say 5 types of animals, like a bird, a whale, a lizard, a human, some other kind of animal in the mix as well, a snake, whatever you want, wouldn't you reuse a lot of the other things? It makes sense. It's reasonable. It's not unreasonable to think they wouldn't. Even with DNA encoding, this is brought up, where every entity, every living entity, every organism has DNA. That's their code. That's the code of life. That's how they reproduce. Every single living entity reproduces through DNA. Therefore, there must be some common ancestor that started this DNA thing. However, if you were building, let's say, a car or something of that sort, why would you not reuse? Why would you try to make an engine without gears? Why would you try to make a way to move without an axle or without a wheel? You would just use what works. And so it's not so unreasonable to think that this was all created by a common designer through some higher intelligence and so on. And they share the same parts because that's simple. It's simple to design. It makes sense. It's a very intuitive human way to do it. There's no need to show off some complexity with the designing. And then also we can consider that these modifications, like the whale is like slightly shorter here, slightly longer here, the hummingbird is like this, and so on. One might say these are simple modifications, but actually the difference between a human arm and a bird's wing is extremely immense. the wing is so complex. Even one feather is so complex. It's like a vein. It's a vein with a hook at the end. And then these are also made to be so lightweight where they can actually fly. And so how can you compare that to a human arm? And so there's a lot of these intricate details that are missed. And so when we get into the details, as we can see over here, we can start to see that the evolutionary idea becomes more and more absurd. Anything is possible if the theory is vague enough, right? Anything is possible. I can make a claim about anything if it's vague enough, and there's no way for you to prove it against me. And so the evolutionary theory relies on vagueness. Keep it vague by saying, maybe it could be that, maybe it could be that, maybe it could be that. And then if anyone opposes you, call them out as a religious fanatic with the answer, there could be some intermediate steps. It could happen somehow. And then why don't you prove it can't? And with such a vague explanation of such complicated things, how can anyone prove that it can't? There's no way to do that. If it's so vague, but when you're actually describing something so complex, like the human body, like even bacteria, so complex, there's no actual way to prove that it cannot be true because it's so vague to begin with. And so where does the burden of proof lie? In law, this is an idea where one can take the position of proving something as true or proving something as false. And so where does the burden of proof lie in the matter of evolution? Number one, we have no basis of experience that such a process of evolution can exist. There's no basis of experience. And if you can say that one can transform one machine to another machine, certainly you must show and provide proof that you can actually do that. The burden of proof lies in someone who's bringing up something that is not available to our human perception and our historical knowledge of actual steps and accounts of speciation and so on. And so the burden of proof actually lies in the hands of the evolutionary scientists. But they take the position of this hoped-for theory, where the whole basis of scientific reasoning was to search for a material explanation, right? It's always, you want to find some material explanation to make sense of something. And for years, religionists, religious leaders, practitioners, and so on, they keep saying, oh, God does it. No, God does it. But scientists, they patiently wait. They've been seeking material explanations for everything. They look at all the look at all the discoveries that are made. If we followed the church, if we stayed in the church, we'd all die of the Black Plague. We'd all die of smallpox. What's the point of that? Scientists have made true advancement, true progress in our understanding of life and the world. And then they say, now in this area of life, in this area of the origin of life, everything is so complicated. Of course, we don't understand it, just like Mataji was saying. They agree. We have limitations. We don't understand it. But that's the nature of science. We push forward into the unknown, seeking these material explanations. We just push forward into it. So we don't consider whether it's a fruitless endeavor or it's going to be successful or not. We don't consider that. So unless you cannot prove that it won't happen, we should continue with the scientific program. We should continue studying this. And so if we follow you, religionist, you fanatic, we will have to give all this up. We'll maybe have to go somewhere and pray or something together. And then we will all be left behind by other nations who are progressing scientifically. We're going to be left behind by other, people that are able to understand science and information better than us. But does this argument have anything to do with the truth? It's just hype. It's just a bunch of hype. It's a bluff, and it overlooks the fact that science is looking for truth. If you can't find the truth, you actually have nothing in science. And so they're using it as that smoke screen. It's like to back up this whole theory of evolution where they've erected it out of their imagination with no foundation, but it's just on the basis that, science will figure it out. And so they're saying all kinds of unverifiable things, like the theory of evolution, and that's not really the way of science. That's not the true way science proceeds with anything. Because in science, you're supposed to show how does that actually work? And it becomes really easy to see this when if you talk about a chemist. A chemist gives you some vague theory about a chemical reaction, what it'll do. And it tells you, okay, I give you this vague theory. Now prove me wrong. And you don't believe them because you're like, you have no evidence regarding this chemistry. And they're just like, prove me wrong. Does that make any sense? Would you accept their theory of chemistry without a proof? Even at your work, if you were to, give some explanation, like, I believe in this, what are they going to ask for next? Where's the data? What shows that this is true? And so it's very common human judgment to have some kind of evidence. But with evolution, we have no real evidence. It's all based on speculation. And so this evolutionary position, if you really get into the weeds of it, is quite weak. At the end of the day, it's all faith. Which process of knowledge, which study of knowledge do you trust? The scientific study after material explanation? Or do you trust some other kind of method of knowledge to give you the complete understanding of the world, to give you knowledge about your own existence and your relationship to it all? So it's now all about faith. Which type of study do you prefer? Which type of study do you like? And so on. So it becomes less a question about what's true, what's not true, whether you're a scientist or a fanatic. It becomes a question of what you have faith in. So you could be a scientific fanatic, or you could be a religious fanatic in that sense. And so what we've done is we've brought them to an equal plane. The idea of evolution is something that's speculative. It's not absolute truth. And so that leaves some room that is open for other types of explanations. And that's where the Vedic model comes in, which is what we can call inverse evolution. But before we proceed, any questions at this stage? Any thoughts on speculation against speculation?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, can you hear me?
Hare Krishna, yes.
Jai, what a wonderful, engaging class. I'm enjoying this so much. You're really presenting the topic in a very engaging and easy to understand way. I love how you keep saying we're trying to get to an even playing field. It's very important to understand. So I have two questions for you. One is, I think it was kind of important understanding this idea of the color evolution of the beetle. So one question is, if you could just explain that again, because I didn't really quite understand how that is so significant. So that's the first question. And then the second question is about, just there's archaeology of different types of human skulls and things that's often brought up as well. So if you could also, I'm sure you'll speak about that, or maybe you've already spoken about that in another class, but that's the other question as well.
Thank you for those questions, Jimuna Mataji. So for the beetles one, so this is one of the examples that evolutionists use to show that evolution is possible. Basically, when we ask what are the steps, we actually have steps for one beetle colored back, or one color on a beetle's back to another color on some other beetle's back. So there is actually steps for how that can happen. And the reason for that is because the color is like continuous. You can change it even like 0.5%, and you'll get a new species of beetle. And so it's very easy for color to show those kinds of steps because that color is continuous, and there are no machine-like structures in that. But when we talk about the beetle's legs, or the beetle's wings, or the eyes, or the antennas, then that whole idea of steps between two species falls apart because they really have no idea how to go from one type of leg to another type of leg and so on.
Right. Okay, I get that. And how is that different than, say, an animal that changes their color like a chameleon or something?
It is different in a sense, but maybe it's similar. It's just that there's a lot of colors for beetles. So beetles, there's like 400,000 types of beetles, or even more now, I think. And so every single one of them has got color, and then all those colors, because there's so many of them, form like the entire color palette, essentially. And so that's where their
Okay.
conception comes from. Whereas that's not
It
the
seems
case.
like it seems like such a very small detail.
It's a
to
very small detail, yeah.
Hinge your entire philosophy on.
Exactly. Yeah. So they have very few examples of actual steps, but
Yeah.
when you just poke one question at that, then you ask one
Yeah.
more detail, then they don't have it. And then the second point you made about archaeology, fossils, and so on, none of those fossils really have anything to say about evolution. Darwin basically saw fossils, saw extinct species, and saw different types of human kinds of skulls and so on, and came up with this theory that ape to human and so on. But none of it actually proves anything. It's speculation that's filling up those gaps, and we can fill up those gaps with any kind of speculation, really. So the theory of evolution is nothing really special when it comes to that. And then I'll talk about extinction on a Vedic level as well in a bit. Thank you for those
Great.
questions.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. I'm going to share this class with many people.
Thank you. We have one more online. Sandesh Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu. I had a question about, so you said that so I'm going to play devil's advocate for a bit. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. So you said that the scientists, they do not list down exact steps from going from step A to step B when they talk about evolution. So here's what I remember having read, and it seems like a plausible explanation to me, but I'll hand it over to you to refute it. So their steps are that at some point in the evolution, a random mutation occurs. And so evolution by itself is survival of the fittest, but they say that mutation is the arrival of the fittest. In other words, it's the mutation in a species that determines a better species, the birth of a better species that is better adapted to survive in a particular kind of environment. So that mutation, the species with that mutation survives. In all the other ones, the incompetent ones, they eventually perish. And this competent one begins to proliferate, and then this population grows more and more. And then that's how you get a new species over a period. So you're talking about a small animal eventually getting into giraffe. On the face of it, it sounds very ridiculous, but when the explanation is taken into account that over millions and millions of years of evolution, some mutation caused a slightly longer neck, and that neck survived, and then it kept on building on the top of that. So over a period of time, with natural selection, you actually get from step A to step B. So this is a little bit also like LLM.
Yeah,
like
that's a great point.
Right?
Yeah. So that's a very common kind of way of thinking about it. There's even other variations of that thinking where, you have 10 steps to go from A to B. Let's say like 7 out of those 10 were actually duds, but then they helped build something for the future. And so a great example that I use to counteract that or give some context to that is, let's consider the E. coli bacteria. Very simple, very small bacteria. It has like a propeller at the back of it, which allows it to swim around and find food or whatever. It has some attraction to food. It goes to its food, and it can go faster than one without a propeller, of course, because that can't really swim or move around. So the question is, how did this motor or this propeller, develop? And when we talk about bacteria, they reproduce exponentially, and if you do the math, even if if intermediary step is going to have is going to have a motor that's half done, maybe, right? And so it's not actually going to help it move that much because the motor is very complex. If you change the fins the wrong way, even you have a motor that goes the wrong way, or it doesn't even move. It's like counteracting itself and so on. So very precise instrument. And so if one of those iterations or those steps has just expending energy for no reason, it will die off quicker, it'll reproduce less, and even if it's 1% worse off than the one without any motor, there is no way, over a certain time span, a very short time span actually, I think maybe a few days, the one with half a motor will die off. So there's no chance for multiple mutations to even stack up at the level of bacteria. What to speak of, other types of things. And then the second point to that is, we can consider so many random things, but there's many ways where it doesn't work, but no one's really showed a way where it does work. No one's given a discrete and distinct, detailed explanation of how one goes from a very simple bacteria cell to another bacteria cell. Or even, it's like when you make it very vague, okay, giraffe as a whole glob of clay, and then you think of it at that level, then it becomes easy to see that. But when you go into the specifics of it, there are no steps that are actually presented. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, in a way it does. The question then now becomes more fundamental as to how we get to the origin of the life in itself. How did the first cellular organism come into being? And that's the question that I don't think anybody has good answers to.
That's right. Can life come from chemicals? Yeah, that was the previous one. Yeah. So that's also quite absurd if you really go into the details of it, but in different ways. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you. You had a question first, and then over there. Yes.
Hare Krishna. So the Vedic classification system of species, that there's 8,400,000.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, like, can you explain how that relates to the modern scientists? They found like billions and billions, and they're trying to find, they find more species every year, so-called species. So how do you?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. Actually, now I think modern science believes they have around 8 to 10 million species, somewhere in between that range. So 8.4 is, I guess, in the range, but it's not exact. One caveat is the Vedas never describe what a species is. So we might just be dealing with two different definitions. So that's the best explanation that we have. There's no real way to see if the 8.4 million species we have correlates with, or is it the same definition of species? So we might just be counting different things. But it does describe a lot of variety, which we do see in the world still. Yeah. Yes, Prabhu? Oh, we'll get you a mic. Yeah.
So you mentioned about all these mutation, evolution happening, so many things happening. So is it pre-planned by God, or it's just some random experiment where he is just putting it in and doesn't know what the end result is going to be?
That's a great segue to the next section, actually, because we're going to be talking about the Vedic version of it. What does Shrimad Bhagavatam say about creation? What is the Vedic viewpoint on how life came about? And so this is the Vedic model, where it actually solves a lot of the problems in the evolutionary process because it subscribes to this idea of inverse evolution. So the word evolution, it literally means to descend with modification. So to descend with modification. And so the modern idea of it is that you start from primitive and you go to more advanced, whereas the Vedic idea is you start off with the most advanced, like Brahma, the creator, and then he produces more inferior beings to himself, and they produce more inferior beings. And so it's a descending process of creation. And so it starts with Krishna, of course, and then he has his 3 Purusha incarnations that we read in the purport today. Karanadakashaya Vishnu is Mahavishnu, and he produces these universes. In each universe, there's a Garbhodakashaya Vishnu, and from his navel comes Brahma on a lotus flower. And then Brahma, he is given, you can think, Krishna is Aham Bija Pradapita. He is the seed-giving father of all living entities. What does that mean? That subtle idea of a seed, in this case, could be the recipes for building all the species. It could be the instructions on how you build a cat, how you build a dog, how you build a demigod, how you build Brahma even. Everything can be encapsulated in that subtle seed-like form that Krishna possesses. And then he imparts that same seed to Brahma. Brahma now has the facility to create because he has now all the computer programs of the entire, of all creation, of all the different species. And when we think of it like this, it's not so unreasonable to think Brahma can take any form, because he can. He can take the form of any species out there. Well, of course he can, because he has the program. It's like a computer laptop. If I download another app, I can use that app on my laptop. If I have 20 apps downloaded, I can use all of them on the same laptop. So in the same way, Brahma can manifest himself in any shape or form because he has all those apps. He knows how to turn on the bird application or something of that sort. And then from Brahma come the Prajapatis, which are like, they're superior to demigods because they are the progenitors of the world. And from them come demigods, come the various species. And it sounds so mythological in the way it's described in Bhagavatam, where, from them it just coming out. There's species going everywhere. But it's not unreasonable to think that they have the recipes, they have the ingredients, and through subtle seed-like forms, so you won't find them in fossils because they're subtle, they can expand, or not expand, but they can create organisms and creatures and so on all around the world. And that's the creative process that is happening on this subtle level initially. And that is what we can see now. Now, there's no issue in evolution. One of the issues is like, okay, it's absurd to think that there's so much precision through random changes. There must be some guiding intelligence. There must be some kind of higher intelligence that was there before it. And this is solved because in the Vedic model, it all starts from a higher being. I came from a higher being, who came from another higher being, who came from another higher being, who ultimately came from Krishna. And so there's a descending process to creation. And so that actually also answers that entire question about, where is the intelligence behind it? And then Krishna is not really inventing anything new. He's been doing this since time immemorial. He's been creating universes eternally. And so it's not like, oh, this time he's going to invent something new. It's already written. All the species are written. All the codes are written, one can say. And so it's a very trivial process for him to create and annihilate and so on. Any questions on the Vedic model of creation? Yes, we'll get you a mic as well, maybe.
Yeah, very quickly,
yes.
It's like a statement by Bhakti Siddhanta at some point that the various, I don't know if the term is Leela avatars, but he kind of mentions the different avatars, and he says how that aligns with Darwin's theory of simple complex. So is there any role of the avatars in the Vedic model, or is that just like an analogy?
I'm not familiar with that, with that concept or that analogy. I would think that it's only an analogy because it's also said in Bhagavatam that Krishna, he has manifested his form in every single species. There is an avatar of Krishna in mosquito form. There's an avatar of Krishna in lizard form, and so on. And so the Bhagavatam only discusses some of the main ones for our own benefit, but there are avatars in other forms. So I don't think it directly aligns, but it can be an interesting way to present the Vedas, present the avatars and the whole concept of incarnation and so on. Yeah, that's all I can say. I wish I had more. Any other questions about the Vedic understanding of creation? Yes. Mike from here. Thank you.
Yeah, Hare Krishna Prabhu. So Prabhu, do we have we have fixed number of species, 8.4 million, that's what we see, right?
Mm-hmm.
From a Vedic perspective or
Mm-hmm.
Vedic understanding. But do we have, for instance, all type of species same, or they, for example, let's say we have dinosaurs, right? So they are extinct now. So since we have only 8.4 million, then one species is gone. So is it gone, or there's something else evolved over the time with this, or
Mm-hmm.
how it is
Yeah. I think you just read my mind because that's my next slide. It's on dinosaurs and extinction. So Prabhupada was once asked, he was asked, well, what do you think about dinosaurs? And he could say a lot of different things. You know what he said? He said they're not extinct. That's the first thing he said. And so how does one understand that? That's a very interesting point to make. And it's because our concept of extinction means that and whatever humans are able to penetrate, whatever modern civilization is able to penetrate, we don't see them. But there's so much more to the universe. There's so many other places in the universe. A dinosaur is described as an earthly creature. We are one small part of the earthly planetary system to begin with. There are many other areas in this earthly planetary system that can support dinosaur life, where it may exist. And then there are even more I don't know how reliable they are, but there are, vague sightings of certain types of creatures in that realm in deep jungles and so on. So that's another way of thinking about it, where it's by extinction, it just means that it's out of our own purview of what we can explore. We feel in the modern world that everything has been explored. There's nothing to see because, we have Google Maps. I can see literally every single tree in the world. Of course the world is explored. There's nothing unexplored left. But there's so much more to that, where in the past, maybe 200 years ago even, there was or even 50 years ago, there was this idea that, I don't really know about this area of the world. No one knows about this area. This is a mystery. But that's kind of gone away now that it's faded. But it actually is a mystery, because in the deep jungle, we have no clue what's happening. There are cultures that we don't even know about, human cultures, that we are still discovering till today. There are different creatures we're still discovering till today. The deep ocean hasn't been explored. And so there's a lot of the world that we live in, this very small world that we haven't explored or understood or cataloged. And so this idea of extinction is quite arrogant for the way we think about the world. And even scientists agree with this. There's a lot of expeditions. There's some famous people that go out there to, that believe that, this is actually not extinct. I'm going to find one. And they find it. They find the species again. And so it came back from extinction or something of that sort. And in fact, our world is like a leper colony in the universe, our Earth. It's quarantined off. No one wants to deal with us because it's just so bad. And so it's just walled off. The Kali Yuga of this world is walled off from everyone else. And so there are other places that entities exist, they thrive, and so on, in very similar kinds of environments to us. And the example for this is wolves. They were almost extinct in the US. They exist in some mountainous regions, Yellowstone, so on, Canada, Alaska. But someone in New Jersey might be they're extinct. They're not here. But that's because they don't know about this, less penetrated area of the world, like the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, Yellowstone, so on. And so that's kind of our idea of extinction too. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. And so one more question I have is, so does this 84 lakhs or 8.4 million species are only on this planetary system, or the whole universe, in this universe?
This is described for the entire universe, but again, species are not described exactly. So we don't really know what a species is. We don't know whether monkey means every type of monkey. We don't know if one beetle means every type of beetle. So we don't know we don't know the definition of what they meant by species. So that's the key distinction, where it's hard to draw a parallel.
Yeah, because I also heard that we have 400,000 types of humans.
Yeah,
So can you just say what do you mean by 400,000 different type of humans?
I don't really know how to understand. If you were to ask that 200 years ago in a very segregated society of ours, they would call inferior races as the other type of human, or something that's an intermediate evolutionary step. That was a very common way of thinking about evolution, where how do you see it in real life? Where is it happening? If it's happening all the time, that's the inferior race. That's the one. Eventually they'll die off, and then we'll predominate. That's the whole. It's absurd theories that come out with that. And so, regards to 400K human species, it could mean demigods. I'm not totally sure. It could mean other types of beings that don't exist on the Earth. So, again, I don't know the details of the species. Yes. We'll get you a mic.
I'm curious, you said Krishna was created from Brahma, and then things keep on created.
Other way around. Brahma was created by Krishna, and then so on. Yes.
Yeah. So I feel the quality, human quality, it's decreasing. We become selfish. We become all these monsters surround us, anger, all these things. Why is it created? What's the purpose? It would have been good if we all were a little bit more higher rather than getting lower.
That's a great point. So I'll take 2 points from that. One is our idea of time in modern science and our modern kind of understanding of how time works is that over time things get better, things advance, things progress. But in the Vedic idea, time is actually quite destructive in the sense that over time things devolve, and they don't reset. They don't get better until someone interferes and hard resets it. It starts in Satya Yuga, it goes all the way to Kali Yuga. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse until everyone's killed off. Then the whole world is reset by intervention of higher beings, and then it starts over as nice again. And so that's just a process of human life. Even with like buildings, for example, or societies or kingdoms and whatever, everything devolves eventually. There's some intervention that creates it, and then it just is not maintained, and it just devolves into something worse. And so that's just the nature of the world that we live in, where things tend to just get worse all the time unless there's intervention. There's intervention on the universal scale in terms of creation, annihilation, the medians, or like the intervals between different kalpas or millennia. And so those are some interventions that happen, but there's also personal interventions that we can make to elevate our own life, where we can elevate our consciousness and try to transcend this material plane that is constantly destructive. Where if we can elevate above that onto the spiritual plane, which is eternal and blissful, then we are able to avoid this kind of distress that we can get from things devolving, from things getting worse. Does that answer the question? Okay. Any other questions? All right. The last point I want to make, this also goes back to why this is so important for us, is because our goal here is to rationalize Krishna consciousness. Back in the day, the most important characters or figures of society were the Brahmanas, even back in Mahaprabhu's time, and that's why he took sannyas. He took sannyas because he wanted to be respected in society. He wanted to be a respected figure because that's what it meant to be respected. But nowadays, that's if you get a PhD. If you got a PhD and then you're respected, Brahmana doesn't have that same kind of hype anymore. And so to be the Brahmanas of modern society, that means that we need to understand these aspects of the world. We need to understand how we can rationalize Krishna consciousness. How can we explain absurd things that we see in in the books that we read, in the philosophy that we study? How can we explain that? And so if we convince them, anyone who's questioning that we're a rational human being and we think rationally, then automatically they can easily rationalize what we believe in. And so sometimes the best way to rationalize something is to open someone's mind, to show that what they think as rational is as rational as what they think is irrational. So there's really no sense of that. It all comes down to what they trust, what they believe in, what has more important things to say about themselves. One can observe, Shrimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, where this is very applicable to me. This really explains what's going on in my life. And from that, one can extrapolate, okay, if this can explain this much to me and it's in the same playing field as science, then I can understand more from it in terms of science. And I can see that both of these concepts work in synergy. Because at the end of the day, science, we're not saying science is false. True science, when it comes to, hypothesis and proving things and evidence and all that, is just detecting patterns. It's not so unreasonable to think that Krishna developed a world that has order, right? Why would he develop a chaotic world where everything's unpredictable? That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that science is merely an approximation. It doesn't cover everything. There are some things that are missing. Key things that are missing are like consciousness, the soul, and so on, the influence of subtle natures and spirit. And so when we add those things, then it becomes very apparent that the Vedas, Shrimad Bhagavatam, can fill in those gaps where something like supernatural, like a stone melting, is not so unreasonable to think because it can be influenced by spiritual energy rather than only having material energy available to you. And so this is something that we can all take away, where we can try to rationalize our own understanding of Shrimad Bhagavatam, our own understanding of Bhagavad Gita, and thus present it in a way that is very attractive and captivating to those that, especially now in modern society, have grown up where things like evolution are just commonplace. It's a part of our intuition. And so this is something we can take away. This is something that we can hold on to and also share with others. Thank you all for listening. We have 3-4 minutes for questions before we move on to the next section. Or reflections even. Any thoughts? Is there anything online for us? Okay. Oh yes, Prabhu. Okay, we'll take one last one then.
Hare Krishna. So when we want to rationalize, right? So it needs to be like some guided rationalize, right? If we go with our own mind, right, then you might get bewildered or you might have a wrong rationalization.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, you can the way the Gita says how one should understand things is that one should. So doubt is the symptom of intelligence. Doubt is a symptom of intelligence because it allows us to actually explore everything. So we should be doubtful. If we are studying the Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita and so on, we should be doubtful of what it has to say. And so the idea is that by hearing these kinds of explanations, we're able to relinquish those doubts a little bit more. And then it's through our own agency that we rationalize something. So this is where it's quite scary because I have to choose something on my own, and I'll have consequences for it, where I could miss out on something or I can take the wrong path. And so it's very important for us to be very particular about that phase in our own journey. And then once that phase is complete, Krishna says that doubt is actually not helpful anymore, because then it's all about sticking to what you want to do, and you stick to that kind of method. And so doubt is an important aspect when it comes to rationalizing things. We shouldn't take anything blindly. And so in the same way, we're trying to say, don't take science blindly. In the same way, don't take Krishna consciousness blindly. Do your research, figure out what you like, figure out what's important to you, and how you want to understand the world, and then you stick to whatever you choose. Thank you. Thank you all. Now we'll move on to the youth presentation. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, everyone. So please don't leave. We have a presentation by Rahini Singh from our Kashora class, from our Sunday school. So she will be presenting on the topic, how to develop determination in bhakti. And this topic is taken from the book, The Secrets of Bhakti by His Grace Gauranga Das Darshan Prabhu. So, Rahini, it's all you.
Hare Krishna, I'm going to present on how to develop determination in bhakti. What does Krishna look for in devotees? So first, who is allowed to perform bhakti? Can only scholars, Idiots, and Brahmins perform bhakti, or does it depend on wealth? The answer is no. Krishna only looks at how much you love him and your faith in him. So Krishna loves you for your faith in him, not for your material possessions. Sudama is a great example of this. Sudama was a poor Brahmin with not enough money to support his family. So on request of his wife, he went to go visit Krishna in his big palace in Dwarka because they were old friends. He went with only bringing a few handfuls of poha. Once he arrived to the palace, Krishna embraced him and washed his feet with his own hands and gratefully ate a handful of the poha. He gave him a place to sleep, and then when Sudama left in the next morning, he left empty-handed, not coming with what he came hoping that he would get, but he was still overjoyed with just the memories of meeting his old friend. When he went back to his small hut looking for his house, he found a great mansion, and his wife and 2 children wearing expensive clothes outside. He realized that was the mercy of Krishna. This shows that Krishna treated him as equal, even though he had not as much money as him, because he had so much love for him. So why were devotees like Kubja, Sudama, and Draupadi all accepted by Krishna? Kubja was an old lady with not much beauty. Sudama had no wealth, and Draupadi, in front of all the Kauravas, she had no one was respecting protecting her in the court. So Kubja, when she offered Krishna fragrances, even though she was a servant of Kamsa, Krishna blessed her with divine, like a beautiful body. And then Sudama, giving him one handful of poha, Krishna then gave him a mansion. And Draupadi, she prayed and surrendered unto Krishna, so Krishna immediately came to protect her. So they were all accepted by Krishna just because they surrendered unto him and gave him love. The life of devotees inspire us to be determined in bhakti. Guha, a tribal man, squirrels, and Shabri are all great examples of people who did small things for the Lord but still made him happy. Guha was a tribal man who just helped Rama cross a river after meeting him. After that, Rama always considered Guha one of his dearest friends. There was a squirrel while Rama and his monkeys were helping making the rock bridge to cross Lanka. A squirrel was picking grains of sand and pebbles and throwing them and trying to help. The monkeys laughed at it because it wasn't making any difference, but it kept on going on because of its love for Rama. Shabri was an old woman who was once told that Rama would visit her ashram. Ever since that day, for years, she picked berries and biting into them to see which one was the tastiest for Rama. When Rama finally visited her ashram, she handed him all the bitten berries, and Rama gratefully accepted them, knowing that she only wanted him to eat the best. So we should learn from them is that the way they did bhakti was so pure because they did it with pure intentions, not wanting anything. Like Guha was just met Rama, but he didn't have to help Rama cross the river, but he did only out of love. And the squirrel was being laughed at from the monkeys, but still just went on, and it just went on just because of its love for Rama. So they all just did it because of how much they love Rama. Bhagavad Gita 12.14 Santushta satanam yogi yatatma dedanishchaya mayarpita manobuddhir yomad bhakta samepriya. The translation: one who is not envious but a kind friend to all living entities, who does not think of himself proprietor, who is free from false ego, who is equal in both happiness and distress, who is always tolerant, always self-satisfied, self-controlled, and engaged in devotional service with determination, his mind and intelligence fixed upon me, such a devotee of mine is very dear to me. In this shloka, Krishna is telling Arjuna that if you're kind to everyone, you don't think of yourself better than other people, you have less of an ego, you're calm and happy in stressful times, and you can control your senses and keep your mind fixed on him, then you will become very dear to Krishna. So, don't be tempted by comfort and egoistic competition. Comfort and ego-boosting competition can come in any form. Comfort can come in any form, just like when King Bharat retired his kingdom to go in the forest and do tapasya, but after he saw that small deer and found comfort in taking care of it, he left all of his devotional practices to take care of it. Hanuman was also faced that when he was ordered by Ram to go save Sita, and then Mount Malaika, the ocean deity, ordered Mount Malaika to rise, and because he wanted to serve Rama, so the Mount Malaika rised up and offered to give him like some rest, but Hanuman actually refused, saying that because he was so determined to save Sita. So we should learn from it that we should always be like on our guard, because we don't know in the material world when you could get distracted and then just stray from your goal, which is Krishna consciousness. And how was Hanuman tested and passed? Hanuman, when the Devatas saw Hanuman's great determination, they asked Sarusha, the mother of the Nagas, to go and test him. When Sarusha took a form of a Rakshas and told him that she had a benediction from Brahma that she could put anyone in front of her in her mouth. Hanuman said that after saving Sita, and returning her to Ram safely, that he would enter her mouth. But Surusha wasn't pleased with that, so she made herself 10 yojanas wide. So to challenge her, Hanuman also made himself 10 yojanas wide, and they went on until Surusha made herself 100 yojanas wide, and Hanuman actually made himself the size of a thumb so that he could quickly enter and exit her mouth. So he wasn't doing this just as a competition, a meaningless competition, just to see who could become more bigger and to make himself feel good, but he was actually doing it as a clever trick so that he could quickly save more time to save Sita. So he was tested because he was so determined on his goal, he didn't stray from it because of both things, comfort and egoistic competition. So my conclusion is, to develop determination in bhakti, you first need to clean your heart, removing things like ego, pride, and anger. Because if you're going to do bhakti, you can't have ego, because you'll think of yourself better than other people, and people who don't have what you have, you'll think of themselves less than. And when you think of people less than, you treat them unkindly. Just like in the shloka, it said, you need to be kind to all living entities to become dear to Krishna. So when you have ego, you'll be unkind to people, which won't help you with your bhakti. And then if you have pride, then you'll be very focused on yourself, and you'll be boasting about yourself and just thinking about all your achievements and what you have, and then you won't have time to focus on the glories of Krishna, because you're only going to be glorifying yourself to people. So you need to remove pride, and you can't have anger, because also how for the ego, if you have anger, you're going to hurt people. But also if you have anger, if you can't control your anger, you also can't control your senses, because you'll just get angry at people for small reasons. So if you want to develop determination, so you have to remove those three things. Next, you have to have faith in Krishna, and you have to take in pride in his glories, not in yourself. So if you have faith in Krishna, that means that if something bad happens to you, you can't just look at other people, blame it on them, but instead you should realize that what's happening is either because of your karma, something that you did, or it's because Krishna wants to teach you something or make you learn a lesson. So if you have faith in Krishna by thinking those things, then it'll be better for you, because you'll know that what happened was supposed to happen. And also you won't be wasting your time blaming it on other people. So also you have to take pride in his glories and not in yourself. That means that you should, instead of, like I said, for removing pride, if you have too much pride, then you're going to be focusing more on yourself than you are on Krishna. So instead of taking pride in yourself, you should take pride in his glories, which means that you should talk about his pastimes and talk about how he's the most merciful and kindest of everyone. And by that you should take pride in him, that how he's the most kindest. So, and lastly, you should focus your mind on doing service on Krishna and on so that means if you focus your mind on doing service to Krishna, that will help you with your bhakti, because if you're trying to do bhakti but you're focused on material things and you're chasing happiness in the material world, then you'll be stuck in the life cycle of birth and death, because you won't ever attain Krishna, because you're just going to be focusing on how you can become more happy. But if you focus your mind on doing service and on Krishna, you'll become more Krishna consciousness, you'll develop determination, and that could give you the ultimate happiness. So Hare Krishna, thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Rahini. Very nice presentation. By the way, this was Rahini's first presentation. She recently moved to Kaishora class, so well done.
Thank you.
Now, if anyone has any question or reflection, please go ahead and ask or share your reflection.
Okay.
You have.
Nice points. One of the points I would like to take from this presentation is getting rid of the anger. So, we also go through a lot of emotions in our day-to-day life. We come across so many people with so many opinions, so many different backgrounds. And so we try to disagree with them sometimes, and we become angry. And that anger can destroy our peace. And there are instances where anger can destroy the person completely. So what I like about Krishna is, even in battlefield of Kurukshetra, Krishna only in one instance he became angry. That was with Bhishma Dev. Krishna always was very equipoised, very calm, and he was more productive in the battlefield. So if you want to be productive in our lives, so this anger thing is a very destructive force. We have to be careful with it. We try to maybe lower our expectations, or we have to find ways to control the anger. Good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu. Any other question or reflection?
Hare Krishna. Very nice presentation, Rahini. You mentioned what are the qualifications of a devotee. So that was very, very inspiring. Because sometimes when we can speak a lot, we can do a lot of things, but we can miss on the basic things. So thank you for reminding us what is the expected behavior or thinking pattern of a devotee. And also I wanted to use this opportunity to thank Braja-ras Bhavana for his amazing class. I was just thinking Prabhupada would have been so happy, and Prabhupada is so happy the way he presented, because these are the nice conversations that he always looked forward to. So thanks to both of you. Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, Prabhuji. So, Prabhuji, I just wanted to share on anger. So, on Friday, I met someone, and that person came, and she was not happy about something in the temple with someone. So she came to me, and she was like panting, and she was complaining about, she was really angry about. And while she was telling those things, I realized that whatever the other person is doing, forget about that, how much this person is suffering. It was like a reminder for myself, nobody else suffers but us. So I said that, instead of getting angry, just focus, you are suffering so much. That person doesn't know even that her action or the thing is making you this much suffer. So you should look for solution. What is solution? Again, anger can, you can work with anger. So you can talk about it, find up a solution. That is better. So it was a reminder for myself too that day, that how much we suffer from anger, nobody else. Yeah. So thank you, Raini. Thank you everyone for patiently listening. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Rahini. I just wanted to mention that Rahini has been very spontaneous in presenting a lot of stories. And I wanted to appreciate how it's coming from the heart. And I could see that even, earlier and even during the presentation. So thank you for all your devotion, Rahini. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mataji. Mataji is always there to me, and my Prabhuji were talking that how Mataji has this much time to come with every kid, and she will follow up, she will get the presentations, and she will make sure she listens to their presentation, and she will give points. She will always appreciate and motivate and give points. So thank you, Mataji. Thank you so much for doing all for all our kids.
Thank you.
Jai Shri Prabhupada.
I was listening to Prabhu's class on the way, and I was very impressed with his presentation. And even Srila Prabhupada, when he was there, he created a bhakti. There is a scientific division. I think, what is that, Prabhu? Bhakti Vedanta? Bhaktivedanta Institute, and they publish articles on science and linking science and bhakti. It was very nice, and I have a few more questions. I will ask him later.
Yeah, we came a little late. Sorry for that, Prabhu, but it was very impressive presentation, as much we can hear. So I will go home. I will go back and I will try to listen it. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Next, I don't know if we have any announcements today, because our Sankirtan heroes, I don't see them here. Let's go to the prasadam prayers, followed by prasadam. Do you want to lead the prasadam prayers? He is removing.
Sharira Vidyaja Jodendriya Tahe Kal Jive Phele Bishaya Sagore Tarmadhe Jivayati Lobhamoy Shudurmati Take jita kathina samsare Krishna bada doyamoy Karibare jivajar Shaprashad annadilo bhai Shayanamrita pao Radha Krishna Gunagao Premerako Shri Chaitanya Nitai Premerako Shri Chaitanya Nitai Mahaprasade Govinde Namo Brahmani Vaishnave Swalpa punyavatam rajan vishwasone vijayate prasade sarva dukhanam hanirasyo prajayate prasanna chetaso yashu buddhi parya vitishtate tvayopa bhukta shragandha vasulankara charchita uchishta bhojino dasa stavamayam jayemahi Shushkam paryushitam vapi nitam va duradeshata prapti matre na bhaktavyam natra kala vicharana na desha niyamastatra na kala niyamastatha praptamannam dhutam shishte bhaktavyam harirabravit Shri Mahaprasadam ki jai.
Hare Krishna, the prasadam will be served in the parking space in just a few minutes.